Yes. Welcome,
Right.
everybody. Are we starting already now?
Yes.
We ready? Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the Journal-isms Roundtable. Once again, we have a sterling program, I hope, that will be captivating to folks about how others will see or have seen our U.S. election and how they're reacting to what's going on now with the president who won't concede, et cetera, et cetera. We've been doing this Journal-isms Roundtable since 1999, and it's been in person until the COVID came along, and then we went to Zoom, and that seems to be working out rather well. In fact, there's certainly some advantages. One is that you don't have to be here in Washington, D.C. To attend, so we're happy about that because we have people even from outside of the country on this particular call. So we want to stick to a schedule so that we can get out of here in good time and get everything done that we need to get done. So we're going to start off by introducing ourselves. I'm Richard Prince, and I write a column called Journal-isms, which is about diversity issues in the news business at journal-isms.com. And we're going to go to Chevry Lassiter. Chevry.
Hi, I'm here. Good afternoon. I'm Chevry Lassiter. I'm the photo editor at the Washington Informer and a photographer. And I'm the producer of a show we call Win TV, which airs on Fridays from 1 to 2. Be sure to join us on our Facebook page, WashingtonInformer.com. Thank you.
Didn't you have a vacancy you wanted to let people know
about? Oh, yeah.
Or?
No, I wanted to know if anyone knows of a social media person. I need somebody for an hour for engagement. So if you know of anybody, please send them my way. I'll put my email address in the chat. Okay. Students, excellent. Otherwise, anybody, just for 1 hour every Friday. Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to be sure to mention the chat room so that if we don't have time for everybody to say something, they can put it in the chat and everybody will see it, and we'll print it out and distribute it to those who are on the Zoom. All right, Steve.
Okay.
For a first timer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Yaname. I'm an assistant professor of journalism at Northern Kentucky University, which is about 10 miles outside Cincinnati. And I research race and gender portrayals in news and sports media. Glad to be with you all.
All right, glad to have you. All right, Yannick.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yannick Rice-Lamb. I'm a professor of journalism at Howard University and a Rosalind Carter Mental Health Journalism Fellow.
All right. Luis. Oh, we can't hear you. Unmute, please.
Now I am.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation, Richard. I'm really glad to be with you all. My name is Luis Alonso, and I cover Washington, the political story in Washington for Univision.com, which is the website for the Spanish language TV network. Before I joined them in February, so I've been with them almost a year. And before that, I was with the AP, the Associated Press, and I used to cover Washington for the AP for 10 years because I got here to DC in 2010. So I'm glad to be talking to you all today.
Yes, Louis, we first met him a number of years ago when he came to our holiday party, and
yes,
good to have him back. Glad to see you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right, Arthur.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. My name is Arthur Cribbs. I am a senior journalism major, sports administration minor at Howard University, and I'm currently interning at Axios with their audience and growth team.
Okay, hold on, I've got to, all right, Chevy, can you take over and get the rest of them? The people are sending me messages.
They're sending them directly to you, I think, Richard.
That's what I mean, they're sending me emails. So
okay, who do we need now? Let's go to Steve. If you've already gone, just say that. Steve Bean, Amy.
Yeah, Steve just went.
Oh,
the next one is John X. Miller.
Okay, John X. Miller and wife.
That's right.
Not quite, but hey, I'm John X. Miller. I'm the senior editor for commentary at HBCUs at the Undefeated, and current board chair of the Maine Institute for Journalism Education. And this is?
I'm Allison Bethel McKenzie. I'm Director of Core Excellence for Report for America. I'm also on the Strategic Committee for Journalism and an advisory board for both JAWS and the Southern Foodways Alliance and the Ethical Journalism Network in London.
Okay, Dave.
I'm former executive director of the Society of Professional Journalists.
Okay, David Honick, thank you. You're muted.
There we go.
You're on mute. Okay.
Hello, I'm David Honig. I'm the President Emeritus of the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, MMTC. That's my day job. I live in Florida, and I'm Chief Counsel for the NAACP there. We just had 150 or so volunteers for the election. It came out very well, smoothly, in terms of intimidation of voters. There wasn't any that we couldn't stop. Just the result wasn't, something we can brag about, but we tried.
Okay, thank you. Cynthia Adina Kirkwood. You're muted.
Okay. I was in a summer program for minority journalists back in 1980 at UC Berkeley. So I worked at a number of newspapers. I last worked at the San Francisco Chronicle as a copy editor, and then left the States for personal reasons in 1994. So I've been living in Europe since then for about 26 years. And now I write a blog that's on my website.
Oh, nice. Angela Dotson.
Hi, I've been in journalism for 40 plus years. I am currently a freelance editor, author of Remember the Ladies, Celebrating Those Who Fought for Freedom in the Ballot Box. And I'm starting to do some voice acting.
Oh, nice. Adam Powell.
I'm Adam Powell. I'm Executive Director of the USC Election Cybersecurity Project. We did programs in all 50 states this year in partnership with the Associated Press, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and public radio stations all over the country.
Okay, Fred Sweets. We can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted.
Well, of course, like everyone else, I'm a Luddite. So not everyone else, just folks in my generation. I am contributing editor at the St. Louis American, my favorite Black weekly. I've worked at small-time dailies, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the Washington Post, and the LA Times. I worked there as a photographer and photo editor. And I want to just quickly say the St. Louis American is seeking a unique, motivated editor to take over as managing editor at the St. Louis American. I'll put those details on all the websites that are key. And I need someone as good or better than Kevin Merida to come in and take over this operation. That is all.
Peter Eisner.
Hi, everybody. I'm a former Washington Post deputy foreign editor and city editor. Worked with Richard there, among other places, Center for Public Integrity as well. How you doing, Richard? I have a new book out. What's that?
Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. I have a new book out with Michael D'Antonio. It's called High Crimes, about the process leading to the impeachment of Donald Trump. Sounds like ancient history to me. And I also have a webcast with Jonathan Weiner, a podcast that is with Jonathan Weiner. It's called Unconventional Threat, taking a look at everything surrounding the election and the dangerous period we're in of interregnum before January 20th and beyond.
Okay, Kenneth Walker.
Hi, my name is Kenneth Walker. I'm
a journalist of 45 plus years at a variety of news organizations, including the Washington Star, ABC News, and National Public Radio.
Okay. Wanda Lloyd.
Turn it up if you want.
Hi, I'm Wanda Lloyd. I live in Savannah, Georgia, retired executive editor of the Montgomery Advertiser, published a memoir this year, and I have another book coming out at the end of this month, co-edited with my college friend, Tina Alonso, called Meeting at the Table, African-American Women Write on Race, Culture, and Community.
Todd Stephen Burrows.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Todd Stephen Burrows. I'm a lover and a hater. I'm a lover of Adam Powell's father's Black newspaper, The People's Voice, one of the most militant Black newspapers to ever exist in the 20th century. And I'm a hater of my friend Joseph Torres because while I talk about Black media, he writes amazing history books about Black media. And while I talk about reparations, he writes amazing reports about media reparations.
Okay, Collette.
Hi, I am Collette Watson. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm part of the Media 2070 Media Reparations Project with Joseph Torres that Todd Stephen Burrows just shouted out. And I'm also Vice President for Cultural Strategy at Free Press, media advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. And I'm a podcaster at Venus Clapback and a former student of Yannick Rice Lamb.
Oh, wow.
Macollvie Neel.
Mute. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Richard. It's great to meet you. I've been hearing about these roundtables since I was a young reporter at the Sun Sentinel.
Oh my
and
goodness.
Would come to DC and different NABJ organizations and would just hear about how awesome they are. So I'm glad to be a part of it. So what I do now, I'm managing editor at the Haitian Times, which is a 20-year-old publication that serves the needs of the Haitian American community, all 1.1 million of us. It is in English, so please check out HaitianTimes.com. We are in the midst of revamping the site and doing all we can to really do better about serving our community digitally. So I welcome all of your input and any suggestions you may have. I'm really happy to be here today. In addition to the Haitian Times managing editor piece, I am a writer and communications consultant independently. So I do a mix of journalism and corporate communications projects.
Okay, good. We got to keep these short here.
Rochelle Riley. Rochelle, unmute.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Rochelle Riley.
Not that short.
Okay. I'm Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit, former columnist at the Detroit Free Press. I'm author of The Burden, which I put in the chat, and author of the upcoming That They Lived, which I put in the chat. And I'm so glad to see so many people I've worked with and loved for the past 30 years.
And Rochelle is on our new board of directors. So
Elliot, let's go to Elliot.
Yes, I Chevrolet. Thank you.
Chevrolet.
Hi, Richard.
Chevrolet, yeah.
Hi, Richard. I've been a news anchor, journalist for over 45 years with outfits such as CNN, Fox News, Johnson Publishing Company in Chicago, in Washington, D.C., where I am now with the ABC affiliate, WAMU, NPR affiliate, and most recently with Westwood One News. I left there recently to turn my attention to the digital space, and we will be relaunching now with Elliot Francis on Facebook Live and YouTube in mid-December, a weekly streamcast. Hope you listen to it. I hope you watch it and share with your friends.
Very good. Thanks, Elliot. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
John Yearwood.
Where's John?
Okay, I'm John Yearwood. I work for Politico as a deputy editor and former board member of NABJ and current board member of the International Press Institute and a supporter of Richard.
Good. Claudette James.
Hi, good afternoon, all. Joining you today from Philadelphia, actually. Founder of Truth in Education and Journalism, also a former reporter, journalist with the Democrat and Chronicle newspaper, Rochester, New York, Hello to all Rochester, as well as a reporter at the Greenville News newspaper and other newspapers. Also retired from the assistant superintendent of the Ithaca City School District.
Thank you. Asif?
Hi, everybody. I'm Asif Ismail. I am just a second there. Yeah, I'm a former colleague of Richard's at Center for Public Integrity, and also I saw Peter too. Hello. Yeah, I run an Indian American publication called the American Bazaar. I'm also a producer. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Richard.
Glad you made it.
Benita?
Benita?
Sorry about that. Hi.
Hi.
I think Sharon was trying to get on. I was sending her a message. Anyway, hi, I'm Benita Bing. I'm president of the Exposure Group. We're African American Photography Association located here in Washington, D.C. I'm also the owner of Talbert and Bing Studios located here in the Brooklyn Northeast area of D.C. on the Arts Walk. And also the producer with Richard of this broadcast. Thank you very much.
And didn't you want to tell us about the jobs that are
Oh,
opening up on the Hill?
yes. So if anyone, and I'll put it in the chat, is looking for jobs on Capitol Hill, you can go to senate.gov or house.gov, and you will, and then look under employment, and they have those job listings there. They are looking for people now. There is a link there for the transition team as well. And I will put that in the chat in a few minutes.
All right.
JP Delaney.
Hello, am I on?
Yes.
Good.
AJP Delaney.
Good. Richard, as you know, my background is so extensive that it would take the rest of the hour to recap. So I'll make it as brief as possible. I'm a graduate of the J School at Ohio State University, or I'm sorry, the Ohio State University. I worked for the Atlanta Daily World, the Dayton Daily News, the Washington Star, and in Washington, I joined the New York Times, Washington Bureau. And for the Times, I was in, besides Washington, the Chicago Bureau, eventually the Madrid Bureau, but I spent most of my time on the desk as an editor. I also worked for other outfits, the University of Alabama, Howard University, Maryland, and there is much more, and I'll stop there, but I'd like to say that it's great to see a lot of old faces and friends. Adam Powell, I haven't talked to in a couple of months.
Okay, we have to, we want to try to finish at 1:30.
Certainly.
So I want to move on, I want to move over to Pam Johnson.
Good afternoon. I'm Pam Johnson, and I'm a professor of journalism at Western Kentucky University.
Okay, nice. Did I say Patricia Gatson? Okay.
Hi, I'm Patricia Gaston. I'm the Lacey James Professor.
Your sound is gone.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Patricia Gaston. I'm the Lacey Haynes Professor of Journalism at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. And before that, I was an editor at the Washington Post for more than 20 years.
Okay. Chuck Stevens.
Hi, I'm Chuck Stevens. I'm a principal in the Global Writers Group, which is a collaboration of former Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal editors. We do freelance writing and editing. And I serve on the Alumni Advisory Board at Syracuse University's Newhouse School, where I also am co-chair of the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Committee.
Okay. Joseph Torres.
I'm Joseph Torres. I work for Free Press, which, as Collette says, a public interest advocacy group in DC. Before that, I was deputy director of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists for many years, and with Yvonne Roman, worked with Yvonne, and was a journalist for several years in the 90s. So that's
Leon Dash.
Hi, I was Leon Dash. I was a reporter for the Washington Post for 32 years. And now I'm a professor of journalism at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
Okay, Sheila Solomon.
Hi, all. I am a past editor and reporter at a number of newspapers, most recently the Chicago Tribune. I'm still in Chicago, and I'm the Strategic Alliance Liaison for Rivet Smart Audio. We create a lot of podcasts and work for the Associated Press. I am also the president of the McClatchy Journalism Institute Board of Directors, serve on a number of local and national journalism-related boards. And I am an extremely proud, at this moment, Alpha Kappa Alpha Incorporated member.
Okay, Chuck Stokes.
Good afternoon. It's nice being with such a distinguished group. I'm the editorial and public affairs director at WXYZ TV, which is the ABC affiliate in Detroit. They've been here for a long time. And I host a weekly show called Spotlight on the News, of which I had the pleasure of having Richard on a few weeks ago with other African-American journalists. And it's good being with this group.
Okay, Fergus Shield. Fergus Shield.
Hi, I'm Fergus Shield. It's nice to see you all. It's lovely to be here. I oversee international investigations for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And before working here in Washington, DC, I was a journalist at the Age newspaper in Melbourne, Australia for a long time.
Okay, Terry Shaw.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Terry Shaw. I met Richard while working at the Washington Post on the foreign desk, where I worked for many years. And then I became a Spanish interpreter for many more years, and I just retired.
Okay, congratulations. Jacqueline Charles.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's Jacqueline Charles. I'm the Haiti Caribbean correspondent at the Miami Herald. I'm very happy to be here. By the way, we've got 2 openings. We're looking for an executive editor and a government editor, and I will get us back in there. So thank you for having me.
Okay, Nichelle Smith.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nichelle Smith. I'm the enterprise editor for Racism and History at USA Today. That's a more recent position. I used to be coordinating editor for our investigations team. And in February, I will have been at USA Today in Gannett for 18 years.
Wow.
I haven't been anywhere that long in a long time.
Okay, Robin Turner. And I got you, Anita. Robin Turner, unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I was just entering into the chat. I wanted to say hello to everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you all. I am Director of Editorial Diversity Initiatives at Politico, and I'm another huge fan and friend of Richard Prince. I want to give him a special shout out for keeping us all going and in community. We have a number of things to laud, and I know the time is short, but I do want to say one thing is that we are a new official partner and in partnership with NABJ in our expanded fellows program. We have a number of career opportunities that are of high priority right now, and I'll put them up in the chat as not to delay this time.
Thank you. Rebecca Aguilar.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Richard, for inviting me again. And thank you for everything you do, especially for, look at all these diverse professionals. So I wanted to say thank you first. I am Rebecca Aguilar. I am the new president-elect for the Society of Professional Journalists. I'm also the SPJ's Diversity and Inclusion Committee Chair and a former NHJ board member too. And I welcome any collaborations that any of you see that you can do with SPJ. Thank you again for inviting me.
Okay.
Alicia Bell, we got about 7 more, no, 5, 6, 10, 11 more. Alicia Bell.
Hi, y'all. My name is Alicia Bell. I'm part of the Media 2070 team.
with Joseph Torres and Collette Watson.
Okay,
Great.
Ray Suarez.
Hi, everybody. Longtime journalist, formerly with the PBS NewsHour and before that with NPR. Currently hosting a syndicated program on public radio called World Affairs and reporting for Euronews from Washington. That doesn't add up to much. I am underemployed and currently making the transition to being extremely angry and underemployed.
Okay. Damaso Reyes.
Hi, I'm Damaso Reyes. I'm a freelance journalist based in Barcelona, Spain, and I'm also co-chair of NABJ's Global Journalism Task Force.
Here, here.
Miranda Spivak.
Miranda.
You're muted.
There you go. Hi, I'm Miranda Spivak, former Washington Post. Lately, I've been writing a series of stories about state and local government secrecy and the lack of transparency in a whole range of issues,
Okay.
mostly for Reveal and USA Today.
Hazel Edney.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hazel Trice Edney, editor-in-chief of the Trice Edney Newswire, president and CEO of Trice Edney Communications, and also an adjunct professor at the Howard University Kathy Hughes School of Communications, teaching multicultural media history.
Okay, the man with 1619 on his hat.
Hi, everyone. Vernon Smith here, former newspaper editor at a number of places, now working with scientists and environmental advocates to keep your lands green and your oceans blue.
Okay, Kenneth Walker.
Oh, Kenneth went already.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Okay, what about Milbert Brown?
I don't see Milbert.
Here he is.
Okay.
Oh, he's muted, but I'm getting ready to
Hello,
go.
my name is Dr. Milbert
Okay.
Brown. I was a former journalist at the Washington Post as an intern a long time ago. And my career basically was in Boston Globe and the Chicago Tribune. Currently, I'm the international editor for Omega Psi-Phi's Oracle magazine until the end of the year.
Okay, Anita Li.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Li, and I'm a media consultant and journalist based in Toronto, Canada. I just want to say I'm so honored to be here. There's so many people I have been in awe of for a long time. And so I just want to thank Richard Prince for inviting me. I feel like I'm in really amazing company. I am also a board member on the Online News Association and an instructor at the City University of New York's Graduate School of Journalism, where I teach about audience engagement and revenue, as well as community-driven journalism. And a lot of my career was at legacy Canadian media outlets. As some of you may be familiar with them, the Newspaper Record, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, CBC, and I also worked a bit at American digital media outlets as well. So thank you again.
Sharon Farmer. Hi, Sharon. Unmute yourself and tell us who you are. Can't hear you.
What happened? What?
Okay. Tell us who you are. Tell us about yourself.
Y'all know. Ain't nothing to talk about. I'm just getting on. What you talking about? Okay, I'm gone.
That's Sharon.
And she was brief, which is great.
Terry Shaw.
Oh, Terry went already.
Chuck went too. And what about Peggy Hernandez?
No, Peggy is not gone yet.
Hi, my name is Peggy Hernandez. I was a reporter at the Boston Globe. I met Richard at the Democrat and Chronicle when I was an editor there. And I'm now a contributing reporter for the Globe and for the Washington Post travel vertical, By the Way.
All right, good to see you, Peggy.
If you haven't introduced yourself, send us a note, put it in the chat, and we'll stop what we're doing. And
Did we get Joel and Betty Ann?
Betty Ann's here.
Where are
Can
they?
you-
Okay. Did you introduce yourself already?
No.
Okay, please do.
Betty Ann Williams, longtime Washington journalist, also with Rochester in my history. And now I'm a freelance editor.
Okay, Joel is here. Joel Dreyfus.
Joel Dreyfus, longtime journalist.
And you are now where, in what city?
Paris.
All right. International. Okay.
Ivan Roman is here. Ivan Roman.
Yvonne.
Hi.
I always say Yvonne.
It's Ivan Roman. I'm a freelance writer, journalist, and translator in DC, and former executive director of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and worked in papers like Rochester Times Union, which is where I know Richard from.
Yeah.
Miami Herald and Mobile Herald, and the Orlando Sentinel covering the Caribbean.
Okay, and who has not gone yet? Everybody, that's wonderful. Oh, so we're, John, yeah, you went already, didn't you? Okay, all right, so we're on schedule, which is great. Now, we do want to introduce, I hope people brought something to raise a glass to, a glass with, I should say, because we do have some people we want to congratulate. One of them is our NABJ Student Journalist of the Year, Arthur, who introduced themselves early. And to introduce Arthur, we have, was it Yannick? Are you going to introduce Arthur? I forgot who was supposed to. Okay.
Yes, I am.
All right. Yannick, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Arthur Cribbs. I had the pleasure of having him in class in spring semester for 101 magazine, and currently now in our interactive editing class. And one of my first encounters with him was when Kobe Bryant died, and I sent an email to some of the students interested in sports, and I asked if anyone wanted to write about it, and he was the first one to respond. And because he was in California, I allowed him to do a commentary, and he did a piece called Thank You, Kobe, which was picked up on a lot of websites and weekly papers around the country, including Hazel's wire service as well. And then he also served as editor-in-chief of the issue that we published in the spring summer issue of 101 magazine. He did a phenomenal job. He was an excellent leader. I almost didn't have to read behind everything because he's a great editor as well. And he's very humble, very talented. He was a Roden Fellow at the Undefeated at ESPN and did a great job there. ESPN also nominated him as well. So it came from Howard as well as from ESPN. He has a lot of respect from the other students. They seek him out for counsel, for advice. They love his feedback and they love his work. And he's an excellent role model in class. I hope you recognize the name and keep it in mind because he's going big places. And he's had a number of other internships. And we're just really, really proud of him and the work that he's done.
So let's congratulate Arthur and raise a glass.
Hey.
To him for sort of a great future. Well, here, here. Okay, very good. All right, next we're going to have, where's Fred? Oh, there you are. Fred Sweets, who's been a Roundtable regular, and we're glad to see that he's going to be joining the NABJ Hall of Fame. And is Milbert ready? Where are you?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. Please tell us a little about why Fred deserves to be in the hall.
Well, I nominated Fred for this award, Hall of Fame, primarily because he is a giant in journalism. Oftentimes, we tend not to recognize people like Fred who is around, but they're not flashy. Now, Fred has a certain flashiness, but it's a quiet flashiness. I consider him journalism's answer, Black journalism's answer to James Bond. He's a real cool brother, you know, and he's cool. He's proficiently in his craft and what he does, very competent, and he is a people person. And Fred just really deserves this award. He should have got it 10 years ago. So really, I'm really late. So I just take my hat off to Alpha brother Fred Sweets. Everybody can't be a Q, but that's all right. You know, that's his only downfall.
I accept it.
All right. We're going to toast to Fred as well, and some applause.
Here.
Okay. Now, we also have Pam Johnson. Where's Pam? I can't see you on my screen. But I remember first hearing about Pam when I was in Rochester with some other folks, and she was down in Ithaca, and she made history down there. And Wanda Lloyd's going to say a few more words about Pam, so we'll know why she's going into the Hall of Fame.
Amazing. We're all connected.
Hi, everybody. I think that the one thing that I dislike about this day is that I did not nominate Pam, and I should have. But last year I made one nomination and I think 5 people got in. No, 7 people, I'm sorry, 7 people, the Metro 7.
Right.
So I guess I have a pretty good track record. My first recollection of Pam was in 1982 when I was, I think I was home on maternity leave, and I read a story that Pam was the first African-American woman to be publisher of a mainstream daily newspaper. And I remember, because I had time, I was at home, I remember just calling her out of the blue and said, "You don't know me, I don't know you, but I admire you and I aspire to become a leader in journalism." And I was just so proud to know her and to know that she was the very first. And it gave us all hope, those of us who wanted to become leaders later. And so I'm just really proud to say how proud I am to know her. And she is now a professor at Western Kentucky University, a journalism professor there. And she's done so many other wonderful things in her career. So thank you, Pam, for all you've done, and congratulations on being inducted into the NABJ Hall of Fame coming up.
Yay. Okay, do any of you 3 want to say something very briefly? Pam, Arthur, or Fred?
Yeah, I'd like to first thank you, Mr. Prince, for the invitation. I'd like to thank you, Professor Lamb, for all your support over the years, as well as the Howard community. Both professors and students have done a lot to support me and really get to know me and boost my confidence over the years. And I'd also like to thank my family. You know, 2020 has been a crazy year, especially for a college student. So my family's done a lot to support me, both this year and also just to encourage me and help me push towards my endeavors. So thank you.
All right. Okay.
I just want to say congratulations to that wonderful student from Howard. My mother went to Howard, and I'm very proud of the scene this year. I'm glad to join colleagues like you, Richard, in the Hall of Fame. In the first induction class was my mentor and friend, Gordon Parks. I'm glad to join him in the Hall of Fame. I have to thank you. Everyone has already, Richard, for all of what you do. You toil in the vineyard and keep us informed about journalism. The most fun I have at NABJ is the auction. The photo auction is the lifeblood of the NABJ Scholarship Fund. And for all of you supporters who are online today, thank you, thank you, thank you. And in the effort to keep it brief, thanks again, and tune in on December 19th.
All right, thank you. Okay. All right, Pam, did you want to say something? Where are you? Okay. All right, we're gonna move on to the,
I also want to thank you for all that you do, and also for speaking to my journalism class. You were the star that year. And I'm very grateful to get this award. And I've been in journalism probably about 50 years now. And one of the things that I'm happy to say is that I don't know everyone in journalism like I did when I first started out.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Pam. Glad you made it. Glad you made it. Okay, moving right along to our next segment. At the last roundtable, Joe Torres gave us a glimpse of the report that he and his team at the Free Press have done on media reparations. So now he's back. Tell us a little more about that, and he's brought his team with him. So take it away, Joe.
I'm gonna toss the baton to hand it off to Alicia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alicia. Yeah.
It looks like we were gonna share some slides with y'all, but it looks like there is no screen sharing. Is that right, Richard?
Well, you can share the screen, but I don't know exactly how to do that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So I clicked it. I don't think I can do it, but I'll share a link with everyone.
That's probably the better way to do it.
Yep. And I'll do that real quick.
Have you tried mousing down to the bottom of the your screen there where it says share screen? You have a number of options.
Yeah, I've done that. I mean, I could do that. You think
Oh yeah,
that'll work?
I was.
Actually, you can allow her to do it, Richard, by just
Yeah.
clicking her name and making her either a host or giving her screen sharing.
Oh,
privileges.
okay.
Exactly.
Let me try that.
Or a host or co-host will do it.
All right, make co-host.
There you
No,
go.
Richard,
No.
Richard.
Yes, yes.
No, don't do that. I'll take care of it. Just
Okay.
don't do
Anita
that.
will take care of it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, while we're waiting on that, I will just introduce myself. So I mentioned earlier, my name is Alicia. I'm a part of the Media 2070 team. I've been working at Free Press for the past few years now, working to make sure that journalists and communities are in right relationship with each other, and that our communities are accurately and rightfully represented and have our stories told in newsrooms, whether it be community media, legacy media, any kind of newsroom. And so I'm really excited to be here today to talk about this work that has grown out of the conversations that we've been having with communities, especially in New Jersey, North Carolina, Colorado, and Philadelphia, but really conversations we've been having with folks in communities across the country. So it looks like I can share my screen now. So I will go ahead and do that. Can everyone see that?
27. Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect. So I'm gonna get us started and then I'll pass it to Collette, who will pass it back to Joe later on. But Media 2070, what we're grounded in and kind of the truth and context that we're rooting in is that we have the idea that we have a de facto media apartheid system where the vast majority of radio, TV, cable, and broadband networks are white-owned and controlled companies. So this is based on the premise that to realize a true multiracial democracy, we'll need to transform this system, and that starts with media reparations. So we see media reparations as a pathway as much as it is a destination. This is an effort at radically transforming our current media system and who has the capital to tell our own stories by 2070, 50 years from today. And the reason that we are calling this project Media 2070 is to pay homage to the 1922 report put out by the Chicago Commission on Race that talked about the race riots that were happening in Chicago and the role that journalism and newsrooms played in kind of stoking those riots and not accurately covering them. And they were reporting on how Black newsrooms didn't have the resources and structure to do that. And then about 50 years later was the Kerner Commission, which said the exact same thing. The news media and journalism had a role to play in race relations and race riots and white supremacy. And here we are 50 years later in a very similar position. So we called this project Media 2070 so that in the hopes that in 50 years, we're not having the same conversations that we've been having for the past 100 years and beyond.
Okay.
Yeah, so this work started with unearthing, and we just released October 6th an essay that was mentioned and dropped earlier in the chat, a Media 2070 essay that goes through some of this history, but I'll share some of it now. So we start off with the fact that the first newspapers in the United States were published around the same time that many Southern states were passing laws to prevent enslaved people from learning to read or write. So we know that a lot of these papers were being created without Black folks in mind, and certainly not as audiences. In 1704, the Boston Newsletter published its first ad a month after its founding for the selling of enslaved people. In 1706, the paper wrote that the local Black population was much addicted to stealing, lying, and purloining. Then in 1868, and this anniversary was just this past week on the 10th. In Wilmington, North Carolina, the publisher and editor of the News and Observer, Josephus Daniels, played a leading role in the only overthrow of a local government in the nation's history. This coup happened due to the positions of power Black residents held. So on this day, they not only burned down the newspaper office in Wilmington, but they also had groups of white residents across North Carolina who burned down Black newspapers across the state. In 1917, the U.S. Department of Justice arrested the San Antonio Inquirer editor G.W. Bolden under charges related to the Espionage Act for publishing a letter from a Black woman who praised Black soldiers for their involvement in a riot in Houston. Also very similar to things that we see happening today. This is one of those slave ads that I mentioned earlier. This was posted in the paper from Thomas Jefferson. And it says, run away from the subscriber in Albemarle, a mulatto slave named Sandy, about 35 years of age. His stature is rather low, inclining to corpulence, and his complexion light. He is a shoemaker by trade, in which he uses his left hand principally, can do coarse carpenter's work, and is something of a horse jockey. He is greatly addicted to drink, and when drunk is insolent and disorderly. In his conversation, he swears much, and his behavior is artful and knavish. He took with him a white horse, which scarred with traces of which he is expected to endeavor to dispose. He also carried his shoemaker's tools and will probably endeavor to get employment that way. Whoever conveys the said slave to me in Albemarle shall have $40 reward if taken up within the county, 41 if elsewhere within the colony, and 101 if in any other colony. So what we know.
Let me interrupt you for just a second. Yeah. People can read these, I guess, in your in the report online, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
So since we're here though, and you have all these folks, what would you like us to do?
Yeah.
Let's go to that.
Okay. Yeah. Let me actually let me move through because we have some stuff about that. So these things are a lot of the history of that. And what I will do is, I think we have the folks in here, the slides in here, but I'll pass it to Collette to talk about kind of what we're doing and how we're looking to bring folks into this work.
Okay.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Richard Prince, for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to my colleague, Alicia, for taking us through some of that history. The essay is 100 pages, and it really lays out for us what some people are referring to as the evidence in, for many of us, our collective work to transform media, to transform the story of this nation. And so what we're doing now in 2020 is building a consortium of activists, journalists, media makers, community members, anyone that we sort of refer to as keepers of the story of our people, keepers of the story, truly of the history and even the future of this land. And so in that consortium, what we'll be engaging in, especially starting in 2021, is socializing of this information to truly ground in what has happened. Visioning what we want to see in 2020. Sorry, I was looking at those slides. I'm just gonna pull them up for myself real quickly. But yeah, visioning of what we want to see in the next 50 years in terms of the transformation of media ownership, media power, the capital to tell our own stories, to control distribution of our own stories. And we'll be also looking for folks to join us in our policy cohort to understand what are the ways that government policy has shaped our ability to own and control media and narrative, and what are the changes, what are the levers of policy that we want to be able to turn and to really structurally reimagine what media looks like. We'll also be looking into newsroom transformation, which is something my colleague Alicia, who was just speaking, has done extensively through our News Voices program at Free Press, but now we'll be doing to really unearth local histories of anti-Blackness and anti-Black harm through local media. And then beyond that, how will we know that we're winning? We'll know because we'll have winning partnerships with folks who are engaged in movements for environmental justice, economic justice, racial justice. And we'll be seeing transformations. We'll be seeing, first of all, acknowledgements and efforts at repair. And we'll be also having people who are talking about the various movements for different types of equality in those same breaths, speaking about media and the power of media and narrative in our past and truly in re-envisioning our future. So I think that I can kick it to Joseph to talk even more about what it is folks here on this distinguished gathering can be looking at doing as a part of this dream, this invitation to dream up media reparations.
I just, I'll just add real quick, because we're out of time here, that I mean, I see so many people on these calls who I long admire, like Paul Delaney, right? So many folks, Paul and Leon Dash is on, right? I mean, folks are like, these are the keeper of the stories. This is the keeper of the really first true wave to integrate our nation's newsrooms that started in the mid-60s, right? The civil rights movements. And where are we at today? We are today where there's a reckoning happening in our nation's newsroom because of anti-Blackness that continues continues, whether it's Philadelphia or Los Angeles, it still continues. We have a media ownership structure where Black folks don't own like we put in, after 2017, only own 12 broadcast stations. How can you create a future where you can control the creation and distribution of our own narratives? Like how can that happen, right? And so this essay, where we start off the essay, is because so many of our folks in our community, we talk about systems of oppression, whether it's criminal justice or education and so forth and so on. But we really don't know in the larger communities, the history of our own media system and its role in maintaining and in protecting a white media hierarchy. Because the media system, the white dominant controlled media system, is a part of that white racial hierarchy, and the racial terrorism that it played, the trafficking of human slaves, the enslaved folks, and to the present day, right? That the anti-Blackness, the weaponized narratives against Black folks has started from the very first printed word and continues to this day. Not only the stories that are told, but also the stories that don't get told. So how do we change a system, and I'll end with this, that we have a truly multiracial democracy that's never been realized? I think this is a true statement. There's never been a known multiracial democracy ever in the history of the world. I think that's a true statement, right? And so how do we do that when we have a narrative that's still harming our communities? How do we reconcile and repair that? And that's what the reparations movement is about, reconciliation, repair, and how do we bring that frame into the media space? I'll stay there. I'll stop there.
Okay. All right. We have time for a couple questions from folks.
I'd like to ask one.
Yes.
I'd like to know how you came about the 50 years and not doing this till 2070. This is one of the most vital projects I've heard anyone talk about, and I'm eager for it to happen sooner. Can you talk a little bit about why 50 years from now?
Yeah, so we are, our goal is not to wait 50 years at all. Our goal is to, when we called it Media 70, our hope is that the work that we do now and take now, the actions that we take now together, that we'll be in the practice of those so much that by the time 2070 comes, that'll be what we know as the media ecosystem and the media landscape. So the work that Collette was mentioning earlier, the work of building these relationships and this consortium and working on policy work and institutional change and philanthropic change and cultural change to make sure that media reparations are real, that's work that we're starting now. We've been asking people for the past few months about what their dreams and visions are for the future of the media and what it would look like to have Black folks honored in the future. And we've been gathering those dreams from folks so that we can create a collective dream and a platform that gets us to that place. So that's work that we're starting now. And honestly, we are hoping that we have wins sooner rather than later because we know that we need them. And I think the thing that we have learned this past year, especially when we saw some of the different policies that got passed around the coronavirus, is that when there's the political will, time can speed up. And things that seemed impossible aren't impossible anymore.
Well, I want to commend your work very much, and I'd like to help. But as someone who has watched this annual celebration of the Kerner Commission report with disdain, I wish you were calling it 2030 instead of 2070, but count on me.
Okay, does everybody know how to get in touch with you? Is your information in the chat?
Yeah, we can definitely drop that in the chat.
Please do, please do. All right, any other questions for them?
I don't have a question so much as I have a suggestion.
Okay.
I think it's an admirable project that you're endeavoring on, but I would suggest rather than try and fix what's broken now in terms of our current situation within media and broadcasting as we've known it for almost 50 years, I would suggest moving on to where it is now evolving.
It is
into the digital, because with digital, no longer are we encumbered by having to go to the media heads, the suits, and trying to figure out what we would like in the newsroom. Create your own platform and go forward, because this is where it's all heading. Just look at the statistics for radio listenership, local TV viewership, and you'll understand that it's all moving in a different direction. I suggest moving towards that way.
Imagine.
We agree with that. We agree with that totally. And the fact that there is a big debate happening within Washington. What is the future of journalism? Because will government step in with all sorts of money to fund new kind of media ventures or to continue to prop up the ones that exist? So right now, policy plays a critical role in deciding what the future of journalism will look like. And so we very much agree. Absolutely.
Richard.
Yes, Hazel.
Right now, even as we speak, my students, multicultural media history at Howard, are studying the Kerner Commission. They're going to be tested on Tuesday, the Kerner Commission report. My question, though, is in addition to teaching that class, I'll also teach media ownership and entrepreneurship in the media. And so it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that what I'm hearing is how to influence and make us more welcome in media that is owned by white people. You know, my question is there a movement to own our own?
Yeah.
And to take over the media industry by owning our own?
Well, David Honig is here as well, and that's what they do at MMTC. David, are you there?
If I may, actually, if in the meantime, while David's coming on, I'd love to share something that I've been part of that's actually addressing media ownership issues, which I think really gets at the heart of like a lot of equity and discrimination and anti-Black racism in American and Canadian media. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. So I'm part of, Facebook launched a sustainability accelerator for BIPOC-led and owned media. All the coaches are, 6 of us are racialized, and it's led by a Black woman named Sarah Lomax-Reese, who's a longtime media entrepreneur, 30 plus years, like very long and respected career. So we're doing the work of trying to support a lot of legacy racialized and emerging racialized media outlets in America to get them to financial sustainability. It did take me some time to actually accept the invitation because, you know, there's a lot of issues with Facebook causing further harm to racialized communities, or at least being a hotbed for white supremacy. So it did take me a bit of time to accept it. But once I knew Sarah and other folks, other really respected community-driven journalists who are people of color were going to be leading the program and driving it, then I felt comfortable joining. But that's just one thing that's happening in the space.
Yeah, and Sarah's in Philadelphia, for those who don't know, at the, what's the radio station, Word radio station.
Yes, that's Word.
Yeah, okay. David, did you want to say something else about media ownership?
Yes, a couple years ago, and if someone sends me a note in chat, I can send it to you. I published a law review article called How the FCC Suppressed Minority Broadcast Ownership and How the FCC Can Undo the Damage It Caused, which runs through about 100 or so old cases going to 1932, where the FCC and its predecessor simply would not grant licenses to Black people because they were trying to serve other than the whole community. It was hypocritical because, of course, it didn't work in reverse. And it goes through all the FCC's policies over the years, which stunted minority broadcast growth, made sure that the valuable licenses went to others until it was too late to get any of them because it was giving away public spectrum. And it makes 7 recommendations for what can be done. We worked on these recommendations with Congressman Butterfield, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, who chaired the Multicultural Media Caucus. They include creation of a major fund to invest in new minority-owned broadcast ventures, restoration of the old tax certificate that quintupled minority ownership until Newt Gingrich and his people killed it in 1995. An incubator program such as the one that the National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters has championed since 1990 in 8 dockets, and it's still out there. And really coming to grips with the impact of media consolidation on minority ownership and quantifying its impact and taking out the presumption that it's okay for some people to own more because it's just incremental. So anyone that wants that article, it was published in the Southern Journal of Policy and Justice, which is the Black law students journal just 2 years ago.
Thank you, David. David is also one of the new board members of our Journal-isms Inc. So we're glad to have him aboard as well. All right, we're out of time for this segment. We want to move on to talk about how the rest of the world, or some parts of the world, have seen our elections. So I want to see. Well, we have how many of our speakers are present? Well, Anita, we know, is here. So do you want to be the first one? Talk about Canada.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy
All
to
right.
speak about Canada. So yes, as I mentioned, I'm a journalist based here in Toronto, Canada, but I've had the unique opportunity of actually working in the US and covering the last 2016 US presidential election. I was justice editor at a publication called Fusion at the time, which was very short-lived, but we did some pretty good work. And I had, at the time, like a team of journalists, one based in New York, one in Florida, and one in DC. And everybody knows how that election turned out. So now back home in Canada, it's been really interesting observing the coverage from here, because we have such a close relationship with the States. But also, I don't know if there's a lot of misconceptions about Canada and around how inclusive and multicultural we are, and it's actually kind of very much a flawed narrative, especially if you look at our treatment of First Nations, or Indigenous or Native Americans, as you refer to them in the States. So the coverage is actually, especially from our broadcaster, our national broadcaster, CBC, which has gotten a lot of flack for anti-Black racism within the newsrooms. I don't know if you've heard that there's some of the top journalists were, heard using the N-word actually in editorial meetings. So there's a lot of stuff. There's been a big reckoning happening in Canadian media, of which I'm a part, because I'm co-founder of an organization called Canadian Journalists of Color. So a lot of the coverage that we've witnessed is really put in neutral terms. So we often use euphemisms for things like, and when I say we, I mean establishment mainstream media in Canada, a lot of euphemisms like racially charged instead of racist. I don't even know if we would venture to say, a lot of establishment publications would even venture to explicitly call out something like, I mean, discussions of race are just not very common in Canadian media. So anything that addresses kind of incendiary language is just not something that's just addressed at all. So it's basically, the coverage that we've seen is very much done in neutral, has been portrayed in very neutral ways. Like he said, she said, Trump's perspective versus Biden's perspective. And that's, I mean, that's I guess a good starting point for the conversation, but in terms of
how should they have done it?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I have a lot of opinions on that. And that's actually something that I've been trying to get them just to name things and call things as they are. So we've actually, it should be called, incendiary language and inappropriate things should be called racist. Like actually one good example was when Donald Trump, there was a whole kind of discussion in our industry about how coverage should have gone down with regards to when Trump was actually calling the 4 female congresswomen who were racialized, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as like outsiders or foreigners. That was something that was covered in a very neutral way in this country. So it was, again, framed in a he said, she said way. It was said, it was not like the way he attacked the congresswoman was not kind of dissected. It was just kind of presented as is without any sort of context. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts, but that's kind of, yeah, the extent of.
Yeah, I think a lot of us saw during the NATO meeting where Prime Minister Trudeau and some of the other NATO leaders were filmed in an unguarded moment mocking Trump. Did that have any effect on the coverage up there? Or the attitude toward Trump?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was covered, but there's something very staid about establishment Canadian media where we don't, I mean, I'll give you an example of how staid we are. I remember one time there was like a Miss Universe pageant where Canada won like one year. And we refused to cover it because it just didn't seem like there was enough gravitas or it was serious enough coverage. So that what you were referring to was mentioned in Canadian media, but it was like in passing, basically. So
interesting. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Anita. Louis, I see you down there covering Latin America for Univision.net. What perspective do you have to bring to us, and what are you bringing to them?
Well, the audience for the media company that I work for, which is Univision.com, is mostly US based, but they are Spanish speakers. So people who live in the country, in the US, but who consume news and content in Spanish rather than in English. And it's, I think it's interesting because, you know, that in Latin America, where, you know, all these Spanish-speaking immigrants come from, we have had a long history of populism in Latin America. And traditionally, we always like to look at the United States as the model. You know, the same happen around the world, of course. But for Latin America, it's a very deep feeling because we're geographically close, and I think the whole continent always got used to watch the U.S. as a model, no, as how things should be done, how democracy should work, and well, suddenly that changed, and I think a lot of people in Latin America feel that we are really now part of a big continent, and there is new common elements that they were not there before. I'm talking about governance and the way government is run. I think there are new common elements between Latin America and the US that didn't exist a few years ago. So I'm Venezuelan myself. I come from Venezuela. I've been here in this country for a long time. But I mentioned this because one of the most important actors in populism for the past 20, 30 years in the continent is Venezuelan former President Hugo Chavez. And he played a major role in the Americas, running a government with a very strong populist firebrand. And I recently, a few weeks ago, decided to write a story in Univision, and it's in English. I can share the URL, making a comparison, because if I found it fascinating how many similarities I could find between candidate Trump and candidate Chavez. And I wrote a graphic, a story comparing like 5, 6 points that I found surprisingly, but maybe not identical, but very similar. And of course, there are main differences. The US, President Trump is a pro-open free market president, and Chavez used to be in the opposite end of the ideological spectrum. I'm not making a comparison in the ideological term. My point is more about how you run business, government, and how you run the campaign, and what you offer to voters in order for them to vote for you. I find that fascinating, and I think the populism is, as a topic, is always very interesting. It's painful to watch, but it's very interesting. And I sometimes, we even among Venezuelans have this common, it's a very common phrase that we like to say among ourselves, that we come from the future, because we are seeing here things that we have been seeing in our countries for generations. I'm gonna stop there.
Were you able to get a sense of how the average person in Venezuela, or actually some of the other countries, reacted? I mean, of course, here in the United States, people were dancing in the streets.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because the Trump campaign sent a very strategic message with the goal of winning Florida. He needed to win Florida, otherwise he didn't have a chance. So in order to win Florida, the Trump campaign planted this message saying that Biden is socialist.
Right.
And that wasn't true, but that was very effective. And the majority of the Venezuelan vote in the country is small, but the same message worked well for the Venezuelan vote, which is, I think, only 60,000 people registered to vote. But the Cuban vote in Florida, the same message worked very well. That's why he was able to win in Florida. And it's interesting because Trump was the American president who has had this harsher language to Maduro and Chavismo in Venezuela. So Trump was able to gather a lot of support among the majority in Venezuela. And the US election became a very heated topic of conversation among Venezuelans. And if you read Twitter from what we call Twitterzuela, which is all the, yes. If you take a look at Twitterzuela, you will be surprised still to this day how many messages are strongly supporting the fraud alleged by President Trump, and that he won fair and square, not only the Cuban and Venezuelan vote in Florida. If the Venezuelans would be voting as well, it would be a different. So it's very interesting how the campaign was able to effectively gather so much support with a false fact, which is that Biden is socialist. I think that's a case for the near future.
Yeah. Is Jackie Charles still with us?
Hi, yes, I am.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. Well, Jackie just did a piece from the Miami Herald about Latin America and the Caribbean. Do you have anything to add to what Lewis was saying?
Yeah, so, so I'm in Florida and everybody's like surprised at how Florida turned out in terms of these elections. And one of the things that we saw clearly was the Trump campaign's message on socialism and how that played well here in South Florida, especially among Cuban Americans, Venezuelans, and Colombian American voters. And when we looked at the breakdown of the votes, that's what we saw, especially among older Hispanics in terms of how they bought that. So, that clearly had an impact. But one of the things that I saw and I thought was interesting was among younger Cuban Americans, where they broke away from the traditional Republican vote or going with Trump because of their relatives. But I will tell you that just in Latin America and the Caribbean, they have been watching these elections very closely. If we go back to 2016, we saw the whole play of Clinton among Haitian American voters because of the involvement of Hillary and Bill Clinton in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. And Hillary Clinton refused to address that. They did not want that to be an issue in the campaign. And Donald Trump, he hammered away on it. He's the first presidential candidate in the US who came to Miami and met with the Haitian American, community. Says, I'm going to be your greatest champion. And, he has not been. And so what we saw here during the campaign was the Biden campaign. I wrote a story when Kamala Harris came here, and we have a large Jamaican American community. And while they were very excited about her, there was a meeting that she had with Black leaders in South Florida, but there was not one Haitian American leader at that table. And that was huge, because what we were finding is that they were, really bothered by this and feeling like, most African Americans in terms of the Democratic Party sort of taking their vote for granted. And in the last day before the campaign, we saw when Barack Obama came here, he specifically singled out Haiti, Jamaica. He talked about the Caribbean. He talked about Cuban Americans. There was a real push for that, Black, Caribbean, and Hispanic, vote. on Saturday when the results came out, I mean, even walking up to results, people were in the region were sending me WhatsApp on things they were saying with Donald Trump, because unfortunately what they've seen is because of President Trump's leadership style, you had spillover in Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of the attitude of some of these leaders. I mean, people would joke and say, oh, they're, you know, this prime minister, this president is trying to act like Donald Trump, or they think that they're Donald Trump. And we saw that not just in our region, but even in parts of the world, we saw that. So they've been very fixated on this result. And what we saw, the story I wrote, is that how some Latin American leaders are still slow to acknowledge Joe Biden. With, you know, we see that with the Brazilian president. His son has been carrying this whole narrative about fraud in the elections. We saw with Maduro in Venezuela, he congratulated the American people. President Moise in Haiti, he was one of the last Caribbean leaders, like at 8 o'clock at night. And I had somebody in the Biden camp who actually sent me his tweet, says, I guess better late than never. So the region is very fixated on this, because what we have seen in these last 4 years is we haven't really seen a foreign policy for the Western Hemisphere, and we can say even for African nations. And so people are hopeful, not in terms of thinking that there's going to be substance that's going to change, but at least the attitude of the United States and the attitude of ambassadors and embassies are now going to be changed, because the directive is going to come from the State Department and not from individual ambassadors. And we're going to have policy that way. So I'll just leave it there, and we can continue the conversation.
Thank you, thank you. Macollvie, speaking of Haiti, what's the perspective from the Haitian Times?
Yeah, so similar to what Jackie is saying, I think the only couple of pieces I would add is that this fixation that Jackie mentioned and that the journalist from Venezuela mentioned was absolutely something that we saw in the coverage we do daily in Haiti. I mean, for a period of about a week while we're waiting for results, the Haitian government's calendar was just essentially blank. There was like nothing happening. There were maybe a couple events or inaugurations here or there of different things, but certainly not nearly as much activity. And so as you saw or have on your page with the Nouvelliste cartoon, the image of President Moise sitting there with the champagne, just watching televised results of the campaign, that was absolutely true in a lot of the people that we spoke with. People were watching their TVs and their phones. The WhatsApp messages were going off. Similar to the way they would act during World Cup matches, you know, the place just kind of ground to a halt. We had Haitian celebrities and different people just coming on and saying, you know, if Haitians would put that much energy into actually figuring out things in Haiti during regular spates of time, like we'd be farther ahead. So that just goes to show you how much we were fixated on it. And on the US side with Haitian Americans, same thing. Like all our family, friends were just glued to their TVs. There were messages going back and forth between the communities here in the US and our relatives in Haiti, where people were trading WhatsApp messages and going back and forth. Haitian radio and all of these streaming services were also just reporting kind of, you know, play-by-plays of the results. That was just really remarkable, right? It's one of the few instances of everyone just being attuned and paying attention to the same thing and just having the same conversation worldwide. It was just really remarkable. Now with the results that came out, Haitian Americans in the streets, you know, everybody was dancing. You know, Jackie reported on the Gaga bins or on Twitter, social media just lit up with just how happy we were for different reasons, financially, socially, politically, emotionally. The toll that we felt under President Trump has just been really immense, right? So that feeling of relief was out in the streets for all to see. With the Haiti response, it was interesting because as much as they were fixated on their, you know, the results, just watching everything come out, like Jackie said, the official response, Moise took his time to come back and say congratulations, right? We had some opposition leaders who said, you know, we congratulate Biden. the Biden-Harris team, they're looking forward to having just more like an actual policy, right? There hasn't really been a formal, consistent, stable way to govern Haiti. It's just kind of been a very light copy of the Trump model, where President Moise just has his decrees, and that's how he's been ruling since the beginning of the year, since we didn't have the elections we're supposed to have last year. And it's just kind of been like a pretty bad copy of that whole style of leadership. So now the opposition is looking at this being also a relief and a way to be able to say, okay, we have a policy. If something goes wrong in Haiti, we know who to go to get some support or make alliances to try to turn things around instead of just relying on an individual. And just not having that consistency in whom to go to. As far as regular people, there I think is where the psychology gets interesting, because as much as we were just watching things and people were calling each other across the states to say, you know, make sure you vote. Here's what I'm seeing, here's what I think, because Haitians love politics anyway, just in general, just talking about politics. The reactions we got were interesting because it was like, well, nothing's really going to change whether it's a Democrat or Republican administration on a day-to-day basis, because, you know, it's up to Haitians to really formulate our own policies and govern ourselves. So you'll hear that. I think what's left unsaid is people are optimistic, but they don't want to be let down again, because we've been let down so many times. So it's almost like they're afraid to say, yes, you know, we're relieved too, and we're happy about this, and we're looking forward to better relations or improvements in Haiti.
Let me just say something quickly that the opposition in Haiti believes that with the Biden win, that it's going to lead to the end of President Moise's governance. And we will get closer to that answer this week on November 18th, which is a very historical day in Haiti. And we will see how the streets fill if you have a lot of people who come out and protest, because now the opposition is feeling this renewed sense of confidence. There's a huge debate on the ground about when President Moise's term ends, and he has had the support of President Trump in the Trump administration because he ended his ties with Venezuela. He sided with the Trump administration policy on Venezuela. And because of that, the administration has looked the other way in a lot of instances. So really that's what it is for them, is that, you know, there's this belief that American policy is going to change greatly under this change in administration. And, you know, and they think that, you know, the U.S. universe of foreign policy, Haiti's at the top of that list. Now, while the Biden campaign did put out a list of things that they, you know, in terms of their Haitian American agenda, they said at the end, we support election in Haiti. They're not supporting a transition, which is what the opposition wants. But that is really what we're going to be watching, you know, the next couple of weeks and months, to see how the opposition and the psychology of this change in the U.S. administration, because even with foreign embassies in Haiti, I said to a foreign ambassador, I said, you're acting like the Haitians. Like, this is like the U.S. is sitting there with a gun and preventing you from taking a public position. The U.S. really has been this bully in the room. And so now with this change and everybody's still waiting to see if Trump is finally going to concede, I think you will start to see some things on the ground, not because we, the United States, are changing our policy, but because of how people in these other foreign countries are responding to our election and who's now at the White House.
Okay. You know, Trump's remark about the S-hole countries got a lot of attention. How did that play in Latin America and in Haiti particularly?
The Haitian government never officially put out a statement, never said anything about it. And in fact, the prime minister at the time said to a diplomat, says, well, did he really say that? You think he said that? They're afraid. They were afraid. But what we did see was the U.S., the Haitian ambassador to the U.S., Paul Altador, that he responded and he took a very forceful response. And I can tell you, Port-au-Prince was not very happy about that because they didn't want to upset the United States. But for Haitians who were there, what they have seen for them, they were upset about it, especially also the comments where he said about Haitians having AIDS. But their biggest thing for them has been the relationship between the Trump White House and President Moise, and this feeling that they have empowered him. He is ruling by decree in that. But yeah, Haitians didn't like it, but for Haitians in the United States, it's been Democrat, Republican. Is anything going to change in Haiti? No, they don't. They don't see it.
Okay. What about the biggest issue that Trump came in on, which was immigration, and of course that directly affects Central America and Haiti and
we
all
have
that.
We have over 40,000 Haitians who are with temporary protected status. There are at least 6 lawsuits, including one by the NAACP against the Trump administration in federal court. The feeling is that this case is going to make its way to the Supreme Court. The hope is that Biden will introduce immigration reform prior to it getting to the Supreme Court. There was a ruling in New York that was in favor of TPS holders, and the Trump administration is now, they have appealed that. And then there was a ruling in California that basically said that the Trump administration can cancel TPS if he wants to. And while the president may have made some racist comments, that did not necessarily play into his decision to end TPS. So one in California, a setback. One in New York, a setback in California. And really what you need is comprehensive immigration reform to finally put to rest this issue of temporary protected status, as well as DACA, which are mostly affects Hispanic immigrants who came here as babies. They've lived their entire lives in the United States, but because of their lack of immigration status, they're not completely legalized. And
Right.
so you're going to see that push, but that's also why, the ability of Biden to be able to work across the aisle, get the support for that, and to deal with this whole distraction in terms of whether or not it was fraud. Did he really win? He's got a huge challenge, ahead of him. There are Republicans who do favor immigration reform, while there are also Democrats who don't. So he's really going to have to find a middle ground and find a way to push that through, because this is something, I think we haven't had immigration reform since what, Bush? Or yeah, it's been a long time.
Okay, Louis, you want to add anything to that, particularly about Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras?
Yes, that's like the mainstream feeling among the Latinos in the U.S. is favoring Biden over the expected immigration reform that he may do, or maybe piecemeal, or the whole enchilada. But that's why Latinos voted this time 65% favoring Biden versus 35% for Trump, which is kind of high considering all the things that Trump has said and done regarding Latinos. So, and I've heard and I read about Mexicans and Central Americans asking themselves, how in the world people who from Cuba and Venezuela can forgive everything Trump has done to minors, separating minors in the border, and all the obstacles to file for asylum, and how come they forgive Trump for all that and they go with the socialism argument, no? And but in the Mexican case, because the colleague now mentioned DACA, I would say that I don't know, I don't have exactly the percentage with me now, but a very high percentage of beneficiaries of DACA are Mexicans. So DACA is one of the many reasons why this relationship between Mexico and the U.S. is so special.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think the only thing I'd add really quickly, Richard, sorry.
Please.
A recent example of how special the Mexican president Salvador has not congratulated
really?
President-elect Biden yet, and he said he prefers to wait. which is very telling because for Mexico not wanting to congratulate President-elect Biden yet. That created a very strong debate in Mexico. López Obrador's decision not to congratulate Biden.
Okay. McAllister, you wanted to add?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think with during the campaign, the immigration policy factored in really heavily in the way that the campaign advocates, the activists had a very specific issue to use to galvanize people to the polls. I mean, you saw Haitian Americans, just the participation levels and engagement was just insane. We saw a lot of just different groups come up to try to get out the vote, especially with COVID. There was a lot of just like virtual things happening, events and just different types of canvassing. I think when you tell someone, if you don't vote, your cousin or brother, husband, sister, what have you, might get sent back to Haiti when TPS expires in March under Trump for them. That's very different from a more vague, like, you know, it'll make our country better or immigrants will have more rights or something like that, versus this thing is going through the courts right now. As of now, come March, Haitians and the other countries won't be able to stay here anymore. That's a lot of motivation to get people to actually go out to the polls.
So.
Yeah, and then with him actually making those visits to Little Haiti and adding Haitian Americans to his senior leadership teams, I think that said a lot about them recognizing the mistakes that they made with Hillary Clinton and not wanting to repeat those mistakes. So the Biden campaign had a dedicated group for African American and Caribbean American media, right? That were doing outreach constantly. That was new this year, and it worked. The engagement, despite COVID, was still very high. And even though they fell short of delivering Florida for Biden, I think the activists there saw a lot of wins in terms of the tighter connections and lessons that they learned about how to engage people politically. And I think that sets the stage for what happens in the midterm elections and certainly in the next presidential elections. So we'll be looking at that.
Excellent. Peter Eisner, are you there? Peter.
I am, yeah.
All right.
A couple of quick comments. One is having on television and on radio explained as well as I could American politics to foreign audiences. One finds out there's a lot of misunderstanding and lack of understanding, starting with the Electoral College and how that's possible. I also have found, and speaking to people, especially over the years in Brazil, Argentina, Spain, places like that, people have no real basis of American racism. They just don't. They don't know it. They don't. There's a lot of concept that this is a white voting country, and there's an exception. No, there's an acceptance of the idea that racism is a component, especially in Brazil. People think that racism is a major component in what the United States is. They know that, but at the same time, this is all summary stuff. I mean, you can write books about this. But the other thing is that people don't understand that African Americans and a coalition saved the bacon on the Biden victory. There's no concept of that. There should be. They don't get it, and which is pretty shocking.
Why don't they get it?
Because it's not clear. You know, they're foreigners. It's not clear enough to them. It needs to be explained more. People need to understand it more. Then they worry about their own personal. The other thing is that in a social media context, they're receiving the same social media and misinformation that we receive here, and that you know, like a vast number of people get garbage information, you know, socialism and charges and stuff like that. Some of it still, originates in St. Petersburg. The other final thing I want to say is that anything that Latin America, Haiti expects to see from Biden is not going to come from crossing the aisle. It's going to come from Georgia somehow saving the bacon one more time, because we're going to be in trouble. And as President Obama says in his new book, Vice President Biden once spoke to Mitch McConnell, and Mitch McConnell said, I'm paraphrasing now, but it's in the book, oh, somehow you have the concept that I really care about this.
Right, I saw that.
Which he doesn't. So it's us right now. Georgia is it. And there's more saving to be done before Latin America gets any value out of a Biden presidency.
Okay, Steve, you had a question in the chat. Where are you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay.
It was for the panel. I'll just read it from the chat.
Okay.
For Caribbean and Latinx Trump voters, how does the socialism rhetoric that they put on Biden mesh with Trump's actions that could perhaps be seen from an authoritarian lens? And then the second part of my question is, could Trump's policies toward religious conservatives also be a powerful influence for Latinx and Caribbean voters?
Well, let me say, Trump and his whole policy, and even those who support him, are walking contradictions, right? I mean, one of the biggest things is that despite the fact that you may have had 65% of Hispanics who supported Biden because of the immigration, there are a lot of people with Hispanic sounding last names who supported Trump and are anti-immigration. And this is, and what we found in Miami is that among the supporters for Trump, among Cuban Americans, are recently arrived Cubans who arrived here in the last 15 to 20 years. So you got here on an immigration policy, but now you want to close the door behind someone else. At the same time, Cuban Americans don't view themselves as immigrants in the traditional context of Hispanic immigrants. They see themselves being outside of the immigration debate. The Biden campaign, they did not take the socialism push seriously. By the time they reacted to it, it was too late. They didn't put out that it was Obama who started the sanctions against Venezuela and not Trump. And also, they did not really provide Venezuelans and Cubans a real sort of platform or program to say, here is what we're going to do if we win. I mean, I talked to an expert and analyst last week who says Biden can't come back with the same Obama program for Cuba that Trump basically has dismantled, because Cuba has changed in these just short years. It's changed, the needs have changed. So how is he going to balance sort of addressing the issue of Cuba to the satisfaction of Cuban Americans, so that 4 years from now, whether it's Trump or somebody else who comes with a socialist message, it doesn't play in that audience. So it's a very fine line. And we saw in the campaign where Biden came to Miami, the campaign specifically asked me to cover him when he was in Miami and Little Haiti. And his message was more of a domestic message toward the Haitian American community. He didn't mention Trump at all, and he did not mention Haiti, the island, the country on the island of Hispaniola. But then that same day, he went to Little Havana, and his entire message was about the island of Cuba. This is how he appealed. So, but he still lost that vote. And I just want to say one thing. As much as the Haitian American community came out, and as much as they talk about the issues with Clinton, our analysis that we've shown, at least here in Miami-Dade, where you have one of the largest Haitian American communities, Hillary Clinton still did better among Haitian American voters than Biden did this time around. And Hillary Clinton still did better among Hispanic voters than Biden did this year. I think that is worth studying, that is worth looking at, especially going forward as he tries to push through some of his programs.
What does your gut tell you about the reason?
I think that clearly you had the COVID, but let's remember Hillary Clinton was the most experienced politician to ever run for the presidency, of the United States, and she had history, so people felt a certain a certainty with her. I mean, even though Biden sort of made immigration the center of his platform, we saw that with the Democratic National Convention. We really never got what the program is. How are you going to do comprehensive immigration reform? And I think the same, feelings that, when you saw some of the pollings, they said that the people who voted for Biden didn't necessarily vote for Biden, but they voted against Trump. And I think that played across ethnic lines and everything. But that was a huge issue. And yes, for people who may have had issues with Trump and how he, and what he has said, he still managed to get a lot of Black votes. He still got, Hispanic votes. And Steve, to your answer, yes, for people, the whole anti-abortion, the abortion rhetoric, the religious conservatism, people use that as their reason for why they were going to support Trump. People say, well, I don't like what he always says, but at least he speaks his mind and he's not coming here with the typical political speak. But yeah, the guy got 70 million votes. So, and people in the world, like Rochelle says, they don't see this as a Trump. They see this as America. So going forward, January 21st, how does America start to rebrand itself in the eyes of the world and reestablish, that relationship that we had with our allies, while at the same time deal with all of the stuff we're going to have to deal with domestically, starting with this COVID pandemic. And people who have expectations, a lot of Black males who voted says, listen, I'm tired of the same old from the Democratic, from the Democratic campaign. So they bought into Trump's rhetoric that I've done more for Black people than Abraham Lincoln or since Abraham Lincoln.
Right. Lord have mercy.
I think the takeaway is when we saw with pretty much everyone, Latinx, Black, is you can't take people's votes for granted, right? We're not a monolith, even if we are one group, Black or Latinx, what have you. So yeah, they have their work cut out for them to figure out how to really target their messaging going forward as they reach out to different groups to get their support.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah, Richard, I've got a question for Jackie. Jackie, good to see you, by the way. Always good to see you.
Yes, my former boss.
By Biden proving that you can win the presidency without winning Florida, it means that certainly he has expanded the map. What does that mean for Cuban Americans and for Florida in general, where people have always thought that, you have to win Florida, and Florida has gotten a significant amount of attention from presidential candidates. And look at what Trump, he's been doing pretty much most of what Cubans have asked for the last 4 years. Does that mean now that the Cubans in South Florida no longer have the sort of power that they did before? Because if we see a repeat in 4 years of what we've seen now, it would seem that their vote may not be critical to winning the presidency.
So Biden is the first president to win the presidency without winning Florida in 28 years. And I would not want to be in charge of either of these political parties at this particular juncture in history, because what we saw was that Biden did not win Florida, but we saw all of these Democrats lose offices, with the exception of the mayor of Miami-Dade County, who's the first non-Hispanic person to win that office, and she won it on the Democratic vote. But the Democrats lost seats in Tallahassee. They lost Donna Shalala, who's Democrat and well-known former Health and Human Services Secretary under Clinton. She lost her seat. And so you saw the public respond to another way, right? They put Republicans, in office. So, but I think with the Cuban American vote, you're right. I mean, but one of the things that's happening with the Cuban American vote is that the people who were so attached to the Republicans because of the Bay of Pigs in the 60s and they hate, Democrats, they're dying. And now their children and their children's children are now not so much tied to the Republican Party. Again, we saw a lot of, Cubanos for Biden, a lot of Cubans for Biden. And I think that this group, if you're the Democratic Party, I would try to find a way to harness this, because if you keep them together, you harness them, they will become the new emerging players. 4 years from now, the old Cuban guard and the Marco Rubio, who was empowered under Trump, they have lost some steam with this change. But somebody mentioned Georgia, and again, we're talking about like national politics, and Georgia is important. I don't agree with some people who say, oh, well, you know what, Georgia doesn't need to go Democrat, and that will just help us to unify the country more. No, if Biden is going to get some things done, which will decide what happens 4 years from now, I think that, you know, he's going to need that help out of Georgia. And what this has proven is, yeah, Florida is still critical, but it has proven that you can win a presidential election without Florida. And it's changing the demographics everywhere. I mean, major urban cities today are changing because of Black and brown people who are moving in. And we haven't touched on this whole summer of racial reckoning that also factored in. I think voters heard the message, they responded, you know, let's take all of this frustration to the polls, you know, out of the streets to the polls, and people responded to that. And a lot of young people responded to that. And we saw a lot of the polls were wrong. Right? I mean, that's a huge issue going into these elections. The polls told you that it was going to be a landslide, and it was not a landslide. Why is that? Do we need to re-examine the way that polling is happening? I think that all of these demographic shifts are going to be having a huge factor, and maybe in the next year or two, you know, the folks who get paid the big monies will try to figure it out. But increasingly, you know, the political landscape is becoming much more difficult, much more diverse.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
The also the Cuban American vote, you know, has been the last couple of decades actually has been changing, and it's based on generational factors like what Jackie said. People who are second, third generation. A lot of Cubans second, third generation, now fourth in some cases, in Florida have become are identifying more with domestic issues. So that's the way that Democrats can get to them and have been trying to get to them. Yeah. But even if they're young, but they come from Cuba more recently, they tend to latch on to the socialism arguments. And we saw that with the Marielita wave, we saw that with the rafter wave in the 90s, and we saw that more recently. So a lot of what has to do with Cuba it depends on how recently you got here from Cuba, but second and third generation Cubans are more apt to identify with issues like education and some other things. And we saw that not just in general with some issues, but also with how Cuban Americans identify with other Latinos in the country. Remember when we were back in '92, in the 90s, I was covering national Hispanic affairs during the Clinton campaign. And I remember at that time, there was only one Cuban group that identified at all with the formation of a national Hispanic leadership agenda. That changes as the generations go on, that seems to change because the younger Cubans who are second and third generation identify more with some of the issues that Latinos in general identify with. So that makes it trickier in Florida also. And another thing in Florida that makes it tricky is that you have a growing Puerto Rican population in Central Florida. And you have Puerto Ricans who are for Trump, but you have a majority of Puerto Ricans are for Biden and for the Democrats. And that is complicating issues even more in Florida. So within the different ethnic groups, you have affiliation with both parties. So it's really a matter of figuring out, each party needs to figure out how they best can appeal to each of the generations within each of those groups.
Good point.
So it's different than like Arizona, for example, where the young people of Arizona, young Latinos are the ones who really, and the Navajo Nation, they're the ones who really pushed to turn that blue.
Yes.
Or South Texas, where in South Texas, you always had Republican and you have Texas Democrats, but the younger Texans are more with the Democrats. And there are particular reasons for that. So this whole narrative about why did more Latinos vote for Biden, for example, I don't understand why people are asking that, because there's always been a variation of opinion within Latinos, because Latinos are not one group. Latinos are like people from all different kinds of nationalities, and based on their experience in this country, that's what helps form their attitudes. You know, you have Mexicans who are, of course, Mexicans were here before the U.S. was the U.S. And then you have different generations of Mexicans, but they react to certain things. There's a reason why California now, I mean, Republicans can't do anything in California. And that happens from way back in Proposition 187. In Arizona, it was all these other efforts that by white power structures to reject bilingual education, Joe Arpaio, the whole thing with not being able to teach ethnic studies. That was, those were laws and executive orders by the governor. Everybody, the young Latinos and Latinos in general responded to all of that. So the dynamics in each place, just like the dynamics about socialism in Florida, that has an effect. So
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, we can't look at everything monolithically. Go ahead. Sorry.
Ray,
well,
please do.
the thing that drives me crazy about this conversation is that if one of the anointed pundits went on CNN or MSNBC with exit polling in their hands and said, we're trying to figure out why white voters in voted so differently from Massachusetts, you think, well, that guy's a screwball. Why is he even asking this ridiculous question? So every 4 years, people scratch their heads in surprise that there are parts of Texas where Mexicans vote in a manner that's more conservative than they vote in East LA.
Who is this screwball? I'm sorry, something
Texans, period.
I'm
Texans,
sorry,
period, vote differently.
Ray, I'm sorry, you were breaking out, and that's why we didn't hear part of what you said.
Yeah, I just want to know
It might be.
screwball.
It might be that I'm just so upset that it's making my voice break up. I'm saying that if a pundit went on TV and said that they just can't figure out why white voters in Kansas voted so differently from white voters in Massachusetts, we would think that person is a screwball. We'd think he doesn't understand the country at all. Yet, if you go on CNN on one of their enormous risers full of 13 commentators without one Latino, and that person says, it's interesting that the Hispanic voters in South Texas are voting differently from those in Southern California, when Texans are different from Californians. A lot of Texans are different from a lot of Californians. It's a more conservative state that elects a more conservative legislature and elects a more conservative government year after cycle after cycle. And the whole story that came out of this crazy election, that Biden somehow lost Latinos when they made him competitive in Texas, when they pushed him over the line in Arizona, when they won in Nevada, and we're saying, gee, those problems that he lost Latinos by winning them 2-1, it's just, the whole thing is just so bizarre, and it particularizes and foreignizes certain voters in a way that we would think is silly if people said it about white people. If you said, gee, Italians in Staten Island vote so differently from Italians in Rhode Island, people would say, well, gee, of course they do, because they're different in Staten Island, the only part of New York that routinely elects Republicans, from those in Rhode Island where they elect, sure as rain, they elect a mayor of Providence and a governor of Rhode Island pretty routinely, and 2 U.S. senators that are Democrats. The constant foreignization, permanent foreignization of Latinos just drives me crazy when they're trying to do that most American of things, which is vote. Mm-hmm. So that's it. Rant over. Sorry, you can go back to what you were doing.
That's good. That's good.
Hey, Ray, can I just say really quick? Ray, I mean, what you're saying holds a great deal of water, because I'm looking at the vote totals going back to 1980 right now, and Trump didn't even get historic proportions of the Hispanic vote. Both of Reagan's elections, where he got more than Trump, both of George Bush's elections, he got more than Trump, and McCain got more than he did. So this whole idea about, woe is us in terms of trying to figure what's going on with the Hispanic vote, it is not what we're seeing is fairly normal. I mean, he did not get that much vote that folks have to be wringing their hands wondering, what happened here? I mean,
But
In fact,
imagine
the
if we
question
ran a
should be,
headline.
the
Imagine
question
if
should be,
we
why
ran
did
a
he do
headline
so
after
badly?
the election. Republican voters vote Republican.
Yeah.
It would seem sort of dumb and obvious, and yet all those 13 people on the CNN risers were knitting their brows about Cubans in South Florida. They always vote for Republicans. Always. 40, 50 years now, they always vote Republican. Why is that even a headline? I've seen so much myopic, dopey, ill-informed coverage of this vote in the last 2 weeks, more than in the last 2 years, frankly. It's been really interesting.
Plus, as Joe points out, 8 million more Latinos voted this year. So when you add the increased numbers, obviously that's going to create differences. You have generational differences. We've always had these differences by ethnicity within each group. So we're assuming, I mean, this basically they use Latinos. We use Latinos a lot as a monolith and expect it to be a monolith. I guess basically they're trying to apply it to African American votes, which African Americans for the most part vote 85% or higher for the Democrats. And so they're trying to, I guess, equate the experience.
Rebecca, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Ray's mentioning CNN, but you know, it's also misinformation that once Fox and their talking heads, you know, get a clause in there, they use that same information, like all the Latinos voted for Trump. I mean, I saw the talking heads over at Fox doing the same thing. And yes, CNN, you know, and all their talking heads, you know, and the journalists, they missed the point. They didn't even try. I mean, it was one day that it was, I even put it on Twitter, where Van Jones says, you know, let's talk about the Latino vote and how Biden's people ignored them. They didn't, you know, court them and all this. And here's an African-American man who, you know, I like Van Jones, but where's the Latino analyst? Where's the Latino journalist? I'm not saying we're the only ones that can talk about it, but, you know, most of us know and have followed the voters, have followed many elections in the past. And, you know, again, that's where the media goes wrong. So whether it's Fox or CNN, they're going to use this information to amplify whatever they want and whatever agenda they have. And that's the biggest mistake there is. And I think that when it concerns Latinos, you know, this is another thing that we have to push. We have to push that we get more Latinos other than just Ana Navarro to be the analyst for the entire group. So anyway, that's my say.
That's good. Okay, we're coming toward the end of this conversation. Anybody want to have any final words?
I didn't want it to be the final one. I wanted to thank everyone for this, particularly Jackie Charles, who does an amazing job all the time. But I do want to make sure that people know that what Ray Suarez said is so important for all of us. And what we're seeing is this sort of 10-year gap in how the mainstream media covers African Americans and now how they cover Latinos, where they're now covering Latinos in this general way, the way they did African Americans 10 or 20 years ago. And we're allowing it by allowing that same monolithic coverage. So I'm hoping that we all call that out when we see it, because it's really ridiculous. And as I said in the chat, whenever the national media starts covering math, I'll eat my foot.
Richard, if I may, I would love to just co-sign what I loved Ray's impassioned rant. I always love rants if they're impassioned and ethical. But I also think that I wanted to add a dimension to this conversation about Asian Americans. And there's been a lot of calls to like disaggregate the data about Asian Americans, because there's this, you know, I'm sure many of you know how like the term model minority is weaponized against Asian Americans and meant to cause a wedge, especially between the Black community and the Asian American community. And it's really important to recognize that, you know, Northeast Asians, you know, who are of Korean or Japanese and Chinese descent are really very different socioeconomically than like perhaps Southeast Asians of, you know, of Laotian or Vietnamese descent. And it's really important to parse through that data so that Asian Americans are not reported on a way that's very monolithic, which is very dangerous, because Asia could also include, you know, Turkey or Russia. So there's been a movement towards kind of recognizing that there's immense diversity within the Asian American community as well, and that we should move away from reporting in a way that just homogenizes the entire group.
Yeah, well, our last conversation, our last month's roundtable, we had Christine Chen of AAPI Vote, and she mentioned the report they had done on how AAPI folks vote, and it's broken down by ethnicity, so that you saw the Vietnamese Americans don't necessarily vote the same way as Filipino Americans or Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans. So I recommend that people get a hold of that. It's online, and if anybody wants the URL, I'll be glad to provide that. All right, anybody else?
Richard,
Yes.
I'm just curious, and we didn't really touch on it. If maybe Jackie or someone else can address how Kamala was covered in the region. Was there any?
Yeah, we were supposed to have people from India and Jamaica here, but they're not here. I saw stories about, well, of course, Jackie can talk about that, but there were stories, of course, in those places, celebratory stories about how proud they were that that Kamala had, as we're right here in DC, Howard University went ballistic as well as a graduate.
So with Kamala, it was interesting. So the day that the announcement was made by Joe Biden that he had selected her as his running mate, the Jamaican Prime Minister decided on that same day to announce the election date for re-election. And so the news kind of got overshadowed by the fact that Jamaicans were headed into a national election and Prime Minister Andrew Holness was seeking another term. I chuckled on another sense because in this whole dynamic of Trump world in the hemisphere and the whole issue of Venezuela, which has had a resounding effect throughout the region and especially among Caribbean countries that are part of a group called CARICOM, we have seen Jamaica sort of have closer relations with the Trump administration than other countries, and in fact was at the center of a huge debate dilemma earlier this year when Secretary of State Pompeo decided to meet with a few selected Caribbean leaders, and he met with them in Jamaica as opposed to Barbados, when the Prime Minister of Barbados was actually the chair of CARICOM. So the US and the Trump administration was accused of trying to divide CARICOM. So I think for the Jamaican government, or for Jamaica, not the average Jamaican, but for the government itself, it found itself in a little bit of a situation with a vice presidential candidate of Jamaican descent who's running with the other guy, and you've had great relations or good relations with the current guy. So how do you, deal with that? But we did see that the Prime Minister Holness was one of the first. He wasn't the first, but one of to early on congratulate Joe Biden on his elections. But we have an analyst here. In terms of voting data, it's basically Black, white, and Hispanic. But we have a university professor who has somehow managed to get some data on the Jamaican vote, and basically said that there was a significant, over 70% of Jamaican American voters in Miami had voted early. In South Florida, actually voted early voting. So they really went out for her. They really wanted this moment, and Jamaicans are very proud. And we saw throughout the Caribbean, even in Trinidad, people were claiming her. So for, Caribbean nationals to have somebody that, of Caribbean descent in that office, yes, it is a huge moment for them. So the celebrations, just as much as you saw in India, was very well received. And just finally, when I talk to people in the region, they say they don't expect for there to be much change in terms of substance with the Biden presidency, but they do expect for there to be a change in tone. And that's what they're looking for. At the very least, a change in tone coming out of the White House and the State Department into this region.
Well, here for that.
Richard.
Yes.
As a Miami resident, I would be remiss if I didn't say how lucky the world is to have Jacqueline Charles and Ray Suarez.
Yeah.
They mean so much. So much of that information we can only get from the Miami Herald, but we need it. And I think someone made a suggestion about making Journal-isms a podcast. Maybe so, because this kind of conversation has to be more broadly exposed. It's absolutely magnificent. I do have to jump off. I've got a meeting on the NABJ photo auction, that I'm a few minutes late for, but I couldn't give up on Ms. Charles and her excellent, excellent reporting on the Caribbean, but especially Haiti. And can't say enough. Thank you,
Here, here.
Ray. Thank you, Jackie. And I'll tell Carl Juist, who's waiting for me, how great you are.
Excellent,
But he knows
excellent,
it already.
excellent, that's it. Okay, all right. We're about to wrap up. I wanted to let folks know that we are still taking suggestions for our December and January roundtable. So if people have ideas, please come forward with them. And let's give a round of applause to all of our speakers. I think that's an excellent idea. I'm glad you all made it, and I'm glad that we had a good conversation. So until there'll be copies of the chat made available to those who are on the Zoom, because a lot of people are putting good information in there. And meanwhile, we'll see some of you next month. And thanks so much for coming. And thanks to everybody on
Hey,
Facebook
Richard.
Live. Yes. One last thing. Who would someone want to say something?
Hey, man. Yes, your GoFundMe page.
Yeah.
It says donations have been paused on that. Can you,
Oh, does it? Oh, thank you. I
advise,
didn't know about
please?
that. All right, thank you. I'll look into that. Appreciate it. Okay, all right, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
See you all next time. Okay.
I'll leave.